Hey everyone, and welcome back to a new video. So, a new raid, 2 new cinematics, loads of story events, and the war campaigns. There's a lot to break down as we exit the battle for Dazar'alor. Of course, spoilers ahead. So, we begin with the opening Alliance cinematic. Now, while this is going on, they use the scepter that they stole earlier on in the war campaign to have a mist descend upon Nazmir, masking a massing of troops that they're using as a diversionary attack to draw away the core of the Zandalari defense. Of course, the naval assault was always the main event, but there is actually something a bit odd here because it's not the Kultiran fleet. The Zandalari fleet actually gets attacked by a pretty tiny fleet of regular Alliance boats, led by Jana's flagship, which was never part of the fleet that was saved at the end of the Alliance questing. So that's a bit of a strange thing, but we're going to speculate somewhat on that later. Now, the Alliance approach, and they wait for Gelbin's device to get in range of the Horde fleet. Some dramatic stuff happens, but he eventually is able to press the big red button, and in the process, he blows up the Zandalari fleet in a move that makes a lot of sense to Alliance players, kind of, and may have been a bit confusing to Horde players. So to break that down, Shaw references a bunch of agents getting away. Now, these agents are actually the Alliance players from the war campaign who managed to plant explosives on much of the Zandalari fleet. Now, the timelines here are honestly really bizarre, and they don't make much sense. These bombs were placed months ago in real time, and seemingly a decent chunk of time ago in in-game time as well, because after each segment of the war campaign, we are indeed told to wait for more orders. So those bombs were at least placed weeks ago, which seemingly is it seems like a bit of a retcon what Shaw says, and which indicates that the Alliance agents just got clear of the enemy boats. Now, that's really odd because they are the same Alliance agents who also invade, set up Grong, get the scepter, and invade Nazmir. So that's a bit strange. Now, it's also a bit odd that Gelbin has to get so close, because previously in the war campaign, we remote detonated things like that from a gyrocopter, so other than for a bit of popcorn drama, one really has to wonder why the cinematic went down the way that it did, with the Alliance, just really taking unneeded losses, when they could have just had a few gyrocopters flying a bit ahead of their fleet that wouldn't have been hit by the enemy ballista. So, on the whole, it's a really bizarre way of framing this entire thing, especially since the diversionary attack on Nazmir makes a lot of tactical sense, and it's a really good setup. So yeah, this naval section actually has a very bizarre relationship with our in-game actions, which is really quite odd, but then it's also an incredibly risky move for the Alliance to pull off. The Alliance plan is really something that has no fallback, because if Gelbin had have just been turned into a hole in the ground, the entire thing would have failed, because the Zandalari fleet was so much larger than the one that the Alliance sent. So yeah, that's a bit odd. Plus, who in the Zandalari Empire just doesn't check their ships for months, even though the Alliance players are not in the least bit stealthy when they're pulling off their war campaign stuff. And also, technically, this means the player character is simultaneously taming Grong, on the boat with the Alliance forces invading, placing the bombs, and doing the diversionary attack in Nazmir, which is a little bit bizarre. So yes, we do get a shiny slow-mo segment, but I think we traded in a lot of sense to get that. Okay, moving on, the Alliance are able to push their way to Rastakhan, and even though he uses the powers of Bomsamdi, he is defeated, with him seemingly regretting the use of the powers of death before the end of the fight, which is probably quite wise. So we see the next cinematic. Jana looks down on the Zandalari forces. It shows her dominance over them. She looks a little bit more spooky and really quite powerful. And really, the action part of the Alliance plan to drive a wedge between the Zandalari and the Horde by defeating Rastakhan at this stage has worked. They have achieved their big goal. Unfortunately, they weren't able to capture him like they wanted, but still. So, Talanji runs up to her dying father, and he is full of regret. As he dies, the power of Bomsamdi transfers over to her. And this is all in line with the pact that Horde players will know about through their war campaign, and their questing, but Alliance players will not know about. So Rastakhan pledged his bloodline to Bomsamdi in return for the power to hold on to his kingdom, but he did not tell his daughter. So she is now stuck with her patron Loa being that of death, which is a stark change from the now deceased Razan. He is, of course, Bomsamdi is, of course, as menacing as ever, but he does seem to have a bit more respect for her than Rastakhan, at least based on his body language. She actually did help him a great deal in Nazmir, and, Rastakhan wasn't exactly a great king by the end. He was quite lackadaisical. Bomsamdi, like players, was clearly waiting for him to die, and it seems like the real upside of Bomsamdi's deal is Talanji. Before we break that down, though, we need to round off the end of this raid. So, the Alliance begin their retreat after completing their main objective. Mechatork is defeated, but his failsafe freezes him solid, using tech that can't be dispelled, so for the time being, he's pretty much lost to us. The Stormwall blockade is broken through, and finally, Jana is fought. The Horde take her down to 5%, and she teleports away to safety without really saying too much. Nathanos, like really in a Scooby-Doo episode, pretty much says, "Bah, we'll get you next time," and that's it. Both players teleport back to their cities, and the raid is over. So overall what happens? Well, the Alliance destroy the Horde's fleet, and Rastakhan dies, with Bomsamedi's pact passing down to his daughter. And really, like Uldir, we don't see that much going on in the way of major lore here as compared to the end of the Legion raids, with Nighthold's Illidan return, Tomb of Sargeras' Argus portal, and the fairly massive events of the end of Antorus. And then on top of that, really, Rastakhan's pact thing and the bombs being placed in the Zandalari fleet, they were kind of a done deal. They didn't really need to happen here, so it's a bit odd, but there still is stuff for us to break down. So first, Talanji. She has switched over from light to death, really against her will. How much of a switch is it really, though? Because with Kalia, we see light and death working together. Further to this, we also now have two death queens within the Horde. We have Sylvanas and Talanji. The difference is that Bomsamedi doesn't really like Sylvanas. He thinks that she upsets the balance of things. And this does make you wonder if Sylvanas is kind of chaotic death, and Talanji as well, like, natural death with Bomsamedi. That would align with the seeming compatibility between light and death, and it would further reinforce Sylvanas' actions being on a natural tipping of the balance that even the entities of death, like Bomsamedi, don't really like. Now, we know that Sylvanas has struck a deal with Helya, and the Island Expedition quests tell us that Helya is not dead. Now, Helya is, a being with power in the Shadowlands, and Muzala is also seemingly a being which lines up with a description of the Shadowlands spirit that Odin dealt with in times long past. Now, Muzala seemingly is a lot more evil than Bomsamedi, so perhaps there is something there, and that these two characters will represent two different aspects of death, or two different directions of death in the Warcraft universe. Next, the Kultiran fleet. Where the hell is it? It's pretty odd, because we went to great lengths to get the Kultiran fleet back, but it's clearly decided by the Alliance to use their own fleet in this attack, albeit led by Kultiran individuals. The Alliance clearly have another plan for the Kultiran fleet, but right now it's really hard to tell what it is. Of course, having that Kultiran fleet will be extremely handy when we go to Nazjatar, but the characters don't actually know about that yet. So the only other option here is that they just didn't use Kultiran ship models, but that this is supposed to be the Kultiran fleet. If so, then why did the Alliance only attack with like 5 boats? That kind of confused me anyway, but it doesn't really make much sense if that was supposed to be the whole Kultiran fleet. So, assuming that the Kultiran fleet is still at large, at full strength somewhere else, then the Alliance has a major strategic advantage. The Zandalari fleet was basically destroyed in port. The Alliance boats did take a battering, but they have another full fleet at full strength. So strategically, the Alliance, they really do have the Horde dead to rights here. Now, technically, they also just wallop them at Dazar'alor. After all, their distraction force wasn't really a massive loss for them. Now, after the raid, Anduin pretty much says he knows as much, but we do know that the Zandalari, regardless, decide to join the Horde and continue the fight. So after all this stuff happens, there are epilogues in both of the war campaigns, and these are pretty important. So with the Alliance one, we learned that bar Mechatork, the Alliance are pretty much fine. Jana has a few scratches, but again, she'll live. And they are just a bit sad about the whole war thing, which is fair enough, but they know they're in a good position. Jana and Anduin meet up, and interestingly, they walk off together so that Anduin can fill her in on the Kalia situation. And this is odd, because it means that canonically, the Kalia stuff in Arathi happened after Jana left for Kultiras. Now, this is odd because, well, she went to Kultiras with the player. Now, before the storm happened, before we went to Kultiras, but seemingly it now happened after that, which is really odd because, of course, the Warfront has been raging there for months. I was initially pretty confused about this continuity error that's pretty clear, but it does seem like this is a bit of a retconning of the order of things so that they can have the Kalia lore be explained to players in-game rather than only in the book, and that further reinforces the importance of her in the upcoming story of the game. But I mean, it is a big timeline mistake. Arathi happened before 8.0 started, with Before the Storm bridging the gap from 7.35 to 8.0, ending before the burning and of course before Lordaeron, meaning that Jaina was indeed around Stormwind after the initial 8.0 stuff went down, And of course, after Arathi and Kalia happened. So yeah, it's a bit crazy. Anyway, moving on to the Horde side, well, we see the Zandalari sign up with the Horde and pay their respects. Of course, 815 will be the actual allied races. That doesn't happen now. And then after that, we see Sylvanas hatch her plan with Derek Proudmoore, wanting to essentially have him assassinate members of the Proudmoore family. That's going to have big consequences with the rest of the Horde leadership. But if you've watched my patch 8.1.5 videos, well, you know how that will go, and you know that the Horde, yeah, they're not in a great position right now, and that Sylvanas will soon stumble into something that she believes will be able to turn the tide of the war, and that sets us up for much of the future of the expansion. And that's the video. On the whole, I mean, it feels a bit budget to me, to be honest. The raid is just using the city that Horde players have been running around in for months. Lore-wise, the Alliance really sealed the deal with the Zandalari fleet ages ago, and Restkhan's death was always very expected, so I don't think anyone's really surprised by any of the stuff that's happened here. And I mean, yeah, it overall seems like a bit of a play for time with me. I mean, between this and between patch 8.1, I kind of wonder if the WoW team are facing like a reduced budget, or if they've had to move staff on to working on the next expansion, or like 8.3 or something. Yeah, I mean, it's weird. And also, I think some of it feels like fan media. There's a large willingness to just go for awesome moments instead of, like, logic. And I think it really hurts the depth of the story, as I've pointed out a few times here. I just think it makes things feel cheap and unbelievable. And while that does work for their big epic moments like Argus and Sargeras stopping the planet, which were really cool, really fun, like metal album cover cheesy, which is exactly what I want from Blizzard, I think that whenever they try to apply that mode of thinking to a more nuanced story, or what they want to be a more nuanced story, I mean, yeah, it's like there's timeline issues, there's logic issues, and whenever it comes to trying to portray a war, if it doesn't feel logical, I don't really think it sells it to players. So yeah, I mean, it's an odd situation, but for sure we have interesting stuff going on with Bomsamdi's Pact, that being transferred to Talanji, and then of course right after that's transferred to Talanji, and we have, Razan being light, Bomsamdi being death. Right after that happens, what do we see? Jana and Anduin talk about Kalia. Again, light and death. So they're definitely going to be going hard into that in the future, if you ask me. There you go, though. That is what I think about Dazar'alor. That's a breakdown of the lore and what I think it will mean for the future. So yeah, thank you very much for watching this video. Be sure to hit up the other channel. There are multiple new videos on that channel since I last mentioned it, so that's all pretty nifty. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.